This happened when I was 10 years old. At that time, during the summer, I was often sent to countryside summer camps. In mid-June, I happened to be in one of those camps with other vacationing children. One beautiful day, my friends and I learned that there was another camp nearby, but abandoned, with creepy rumors surrounding it. This intrigued us so much that we decided to sneak in and see what this place was about. The smartest one among us, naturally because he wore glasses, Kevin said that you couldn't just casually enter the abandoned camp. So we had to come up with a brilliant plan, which essentially involved getting there only late at night to avoid being seen. And so our group of young foolish explorers, consisting of 3 people, myself, Kevin, and George, gathered at 3 in the morning and discreetly left the dormitory, which wasn't locked with a key at night, but just bolted. We exited the camp through one of the numerous holes in the fence and headed towards our destination. Soon we were faced with gates behind which abandoned buildings and various small structures, like those found on playgrounds, could be seen. Since we didn't find any holes in the fence, we simply climbed over to the other side. "Let's go to the 3rd building," George said excitedly. "There's a room of oblivion there." We knew about the rumors circulating regarding this room. Legend has it that whoever enters this room at night and stays there for a few minutes will vanish from the world forever. "And where will the one who vanishes end up?" I asked. "How's that? Where?" "Nowhere," Kevin replied. "Well, he must end up somewhere, right?" I didn't understand. "Then you'll check it out," George suggested. "You'll go in, we'll close the door, and 5 minutes later we'll open it. And then you'll tell us where you were, right?" "It's all nonsense," I waved my hand dismissively. "So it won't be hard for you to do it," George replied. "All right, no problem," I calmly said, and imagined how everyone would be amazed by my fearlessness. We entered the 3rd building and reached the desired room. To be honest, I was very scared at that moment. The inside of the door was covered with scratches and inscriptions, among which stood out vividly. "Let me out. I want to go home. They're coming. And where did everyone disappear to?" Inside the room itself was a real mess. Various papers, fabric scraps, and pieces of cardboard were scattered everywhere. Among all this mess were 3 beds stained with dirt. "Changed your mind, huh?" George asked mockingly, apparently noticing the change in my expression. "Not at all," I said confidently, pushing my fear aside, and went in, sitting down on one of the beds. Closed the door. They were surprised by my mood and silently closed the door. I was left alone in that room. My fear began to grow. After just a minute, I hastily left. "Hey, you didn't stay there long enough," George said. "Not even a minute." "Yeah, you should have stayed there longer." Kevin supported him. Eventually, I went back into the room and they closed the door again. The fear started to escalate quickly once more, but I held on as best as I could. This time I managed to stay there for about 4 minutes before attempting to leave. The door wouldn't open. I pushed with all my might, but it didn't budge an inch. "This isn't funny," I yelled. "Open the door, let me out." But the door remained closed. After some time, I stopped banging on it and listened. I was hoping to hear the quiet laughter of my friends, those jerks, but there was complete silence. I couldn't hear any sounds at all. I understood that they propped the door with something and left, leaving me here. What jerks? Trying to knock down the door for another half hour, I realized that I wouldn't succeed. In tears, I sat on the dirty bed and waited for them to open it themselves. I sat like that for quite a while, maybe an hour or even more. At some point, the room's door cracked open. Making a faint creaking sound, I jumped up and rushed into the corridor, but I didn't see anyone there. Listening closely, I heard nothing and thought that these jerks were hiding somewhere and would jump out to scare me, but no one did. I headed back to the camp. I figured that if they were still lurking behind somewhere, then screw them. In any case, they would return. As I walked back, I couldn't help but notice that it had become unusually quiet. Too quiet. But I didn't pay much attention to it and had already entered my camp's territory. Suddenly, my gaze was drawn to a scrap of paper. I picked it up and discovered that it was a missing persons announcement. About me missing. It had my photo and a note saying a child had disappeared. How could I have disappeared when I'm here? I'd been gone for at most 2 hours. What the hell? I thought and ran to my dormitory. Approaching the entrance, I saw that the doors were wide open. When I stepped inside, I nearly fell from surprise. Everything looked as if it had been abandoned for a long time. Trash was strewn everywhere. Dirt, cobwebs, and thick layers of dust covered everything. In the night's darkness, I hurried through all the rooms, each time finding only scattered junk. In tears, I stopped in the middle of the corridor, trying to make sense of what was happening. How, where, nowhere, popped into my mind. Suddenly, I heard an unfamiliar rustling from behind. I turned around, expecting to see someone familiar, but instead something terrifying was looking at me. I couldn't make out all the details, but it resembled a slightly contorted figure of a person, its silhouette frozen at the end of the corridor. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, arms frozen as if halted mid-strange dance, elbows bent, hands twisted in unnatural angles. Its legs were crossed and knees pressed together. I stood and stared at this thing, and it stared back at me. This lasted for about 10 seconds, after which the creature suddenly lunged forward, limbs jerking and legs bending at unnatural angles, and charged at me. I ran, outpacing any known champions, crossing flights of stairs in a couple of strides, and burst out onto the street. I sprinted toward the fence away from the camp, convinced I had escaped. But looking back, I saw that the monstrosity was still on my heels, moving its crooked legs far too swiftly and jerking its head in various directions. Here it was brighter than inside the building, and I could now discern its large black eyes fixed on me. I screamed and tried to run even faster. Slipping through a hole in the fence, I dashed into the woods, dodging trees. But at some point, I couldn't maneuver properly, collided with a tree, shattered my nose, and fell to the ground. What happened next? I couldn't remember. George and Kevin couldn't open that door at night after I went in for the second time. They didn't hear me, so they assumed I was playing a prank and went back to their camp typical friends. The next morning, it was discovered that I hadn't returned. They had to explain that we had gone to the abandoned camp, and I stayed there. This news shocked the camp counselors and other staff members a bit, as there had never been any camp nearby. Moreover, all the kids were surprised, saying they had never heard of these rumors before. No announcements were being printed. Search teams with the police combed the area. The next day, they eventually found me in the forest several kilometers away from the camp. I was covered in bruises, and cuts, not speaking a word to anyone. A few gray hairs appeared on my head. What happened to me, where I was, and how I got out, no one knows. After that, I visited a psychologist several times who tried to explain that what I remembered were false memories I implanted due to fear. I might have believed it, but the sheet of paper I clench in my hand keeps bothering me. Attention. A child disappeared at night on such and such date, left the summer camp and did not return. Anyone with any information regarding this incident is urged to report to the police immediately. I, too, would like to have some information about it. Given all the circumstances, I'm plagued by doubts. Of course, many strange things happened, and most of them I can't explain. But who knows, perhaps, as the legend suggested, I truly vanished from my own world where they never found me. And now I'm in another, very similar one, where there was never a second abandoned camp that nobody here has ever heard of.